Today, we're talking all about portfolios in FTC and how you can make your engineering portfolio more Inspire Award-winning worthy. Overall, excellent example of something like a design-based award. I'm Coach Pratt, and I've been teaching robotics and design for over a decade now, and I've mentored teams to winning multiple Inspire Awards at regional and district events. And today, I'm going to walk you through the theory of how to make a better engineering journal. I'll show you some examples of things to do and things not to do as you're designing it. I'll walk through some basic general things that all teams should be including inside the portfolio. And then I'll show you some examples of how you might get a better chance of winning specific awards. So first up, what's the purpose of an engineering portfolio? The purpose of an engineering portfolio is to be able to win awards in an FTC context. You always got to think about why am I doing this? And it is to show your engineering journal. But really, the purpose of it is to be able to show the judges your stories that you can win awards. That's really the main goal here. So you have to make sure you understand the 7, well, sometimes 8 awards in the FTC season so that you know exactly what has to go inside that portfolio as well, so you can know which awards require portfolio awards and which ones don't require portfolios, because those ones you should also be focusing on more. So if the purpose of a portfolio is to win awards, you should tailor this portfolio in such a way that nothing is included in this portfolio if it doesn't relate to an award. So you get 15 pages. I see some teams put in fun pages sometimes. They just load it up with photos. Unfortunately, that's not really going to get you towards doing awards. Maybe a sustain because you're showing you're more fun as a community, but if you don't explain why you did that, it's not going to get you there. So with that premise in mind, let's talk about some basic things that every single portfolio should be using as a sort of general rules of thumb before we get into more specifics. First thing to note is that you should never, well, not never, but only Sith steal in absolutes. You should not have large paragraphs of text. Yeah, always focus on bullet points over paragraphs, point form over long prose. This is not English class. This is for engineering and your portfolios. I highly suggest you keep your team number on each page, because it can be really hard to keep a track of, for the judges when they're going through these things rapidly, what team is it that they're focusing on. Of course, you've got your page limit of 15 plus a cover. This does change every season, so make sure you're checking the manual. Another thing is that you should show and not tell. You should have annotations for any pictures that you're throwing in so that judges know what it is that you're looking at. We'll get more into that on some other examples. You want to document your failures and your growth from that failures. Too many teams only document their final product. You have to document how you are growing as an engineer throughout the season, things that didn't work, and then what you learned from that step. This is the design cycle, not a finished product. I highly recommend that you lay your pages out in such a way that you hit on all the award-specific criteria first that are required, and then encourage. In fact, I actually encourage you to go as far as to label what award that page is for on your portfolio, so that judges can see as they're going through these rubrics, okay, they have all the required material. Do they have the encouraged material? Oftentimes, less is more. The amount of times that I see teams submit portfolios that are just walls of text and large portfolios, yes, it might be interesting to look through, but you have to recognize that judges don't have a lot of time to look through your portfolio. At most, they get 10, maybe 15 minutes to look through your portfolio. So if it takes you half an hour to read your portfolio, you're probably not getting there. And the reality is, unfortunately, sometimes, just due to time constraints, judges are skimming your portfolios as well. So you really have to make sure that this content pops out. So oftentimes, saying less is more to get those judges intrigued to come talk to you at that pinch review so that they can figure out more about your team. Another thing I'll say is that, taken from Simon Sinek's ideas, is that you really have to start with the why. Why did you do these design changes? Why did you connect with these engineering mentors? Why are these calculations inside of your portfolio so you can know how much weight you can lift? What is its purpose? Why is it there? So many teams explain what they've done without explaining why it is that they did it. So start with that why on every single page. As I said, you only get 10, 15 minutes, and then set each page up by an award name. So that's just some really basic tips that I can give you that every portfolio should be following. Let's talk about how you can make those specific awards a little bit better now. So talking about the Inspire Award, of course, you have to be able to submit a portfolio to be able to win an Inspire Award. you're also strong across either a MCI award or a team attribute award. And then you also have to be a running contender in a Think Award. So you really got to be hitting everything. You got to make sure you're showing judges that you're positive and inclusive to other teams in an area. And then you have to be able to describe and document this. The thing that a lot of teams don't recognize in the Inspire is that while the portfolio does help for the Inspire, a lot of the Inspire award comes from the judge interviews and your presentation as well. That presentation, the 5 minutes you get to talk to a judge, is for shortlisting you for PIT interviews. Yes, predominantly portfolios are used for the Think Award and the Control Award. It is a supplementary piece for the Inspire Award. So you should really be honing a lot of your efforts in on the Think Award and a lot of your efforts in on the Control Award as far as your portfolio goes, in my opinion. Talk about this idea of less is more. I want to talk a bit about an aesthetic design that I've seen. This is HiveMind Flores. I believe this was for their center stage season. And I really like how they have not filled up their page with just a whack load of text. There are specific bolded points on certain things, allows things to jump out at me, as well as making it easier for a judge to say, okay, let's talk about industry mentors. Let's talk about things like what have they done for an open source for FTC and FRC teams? What kind of things they've done? And I really like the aesthetics on this in that there's not a ton, but there are discrete sections I'm looking at with really clear titles. There's also clear titles on what it is that I'm doing as well. Now, I'd recommend rather than saying outreach community, now at a certain point, there used to be an award that was an outreach award where it was kind of community and connections. It's now been simplified in this respect for the Decode season. So you should definitely separate those as specific awards. Now, in terms of some of the content, I think that this could be improved. But as far as aesthetics go, this is a very pretty looking engineering journal. It's really easy to read. I think that that's really critical for a lot of these teams to be able to go through. Now let's talk about the Think Award. So Think Award, of course, you have to have a portfolio. The big things that they want to see is when you're thinking about analyzing these awards, a lot of teams just completely glance over this. But this is really kind of the shining idea of what this award is all about. So the Think Award is all about how did your team move through the season and how did you use the engineering design process to inform decisions? Take that Simon Sinek, a la start with the why. Yes? So there's lots of things like lessons learned, trade-off analysis, mathematical analysis, evidence of an engineering process, whether you're using a design process or a different process through that respect. You need to be showing the judges that you are doing these things. So an example of how you might do that, looking at the Think Award here, while this doesn't encompass everything, I really like this design matrix from Team 24331 for their Into the Deep Caesar circuitry. This design matrix is a great way of showing that you are trying to analyze your performance here. So you have a geared arm, you've got a chained arm with a Viper slide on it, and you've got a linear slides with a virtual 4-bar. And you're talking about how are you being more accurate? How are you being consistent? How many points per second you're getting? What's your simplicity? What's your reliability? Things like that. One thing that would make this a lot more beneficial is perhaps a small little matrix on the top explaining how did you define accuracy? How did you define consistency? How did you define simplicity, especially with things that are nebulous like simplicity and reliability? For instance, you've got a geared arm and a chained arm with Viper is more reliable than a linear slide with a virtual 4-bar. How'd you come to that conclusion, right? So why did you come up with that? I thought it was a good way that this thing could be improved. So giving yourself some actual mathematical data and design matrix, risk analysis matrix are really what judges are looking for in that sort of Think Award. Why are you doing things like this? Now, I'm not saying this is the only thing you can do to be able to get a Think Award, but it is a good example of how you might go about improving that Think Award. Now, with the Think Award specifically, this is one award that I suggest that you don't actually have a specific page for. And the reason being is that you are going to be showing evidence of an engineering process all throughout. You're going to be showing lessons learned and implemented all throughout. When you're on your design page, you should be showing how you're iterating over time, how it is that this design is improving on the other one, and how you know that it is an improvement. That's a really important thing. Same deal here, development plan for new skills. This is very much a Connect-based award now. So a lot of these things are already rolled into other awards and you're already doing a lot of these things. So I don't necessarily suggest that you put a think page specifically because there are a lot of those pages. Now the Connect Award is all about learning from your community and connecting with other people already in that STEM area. So it is connecting with other teams. It is connecting with industry mentors, engineers, marketers, things like that. It's people who can help you improve your own soft skills. And the big thing they want to see here is how are you learning? And how have you taken steps towards learning those goals? So an example of how you might do that in terms of that Connect-based award here is, here's one example here from Team 9974. They do have specific people that it is they're learning from, and then they have what they've got guidance on. One thing I'd like to see more of this is to integrate this a little bit more into your portfolio. So what I suggest some teams do on Connect is to make a 3-paged or a 3-columned, that needs to be sheets.new, to make a 3-column list. So you might have team member, and then goals, and then progress made. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to say, from mentor X, I learned Y. And this is how you actually put it. No, that's not spelled correctly, but you get my intention. So what is that team member's goals for the season? What is it they're trying to do? Are they trying to improve their CAD skills? Are they trying to learn how to program a color sensor in Java? Are they trying to learn how to use finite state machines? These should be concrete goals that teams are trying to do. And then in the progress that they've made, how are they moving towards that progress? And how did they connect with other mentors and peers in the industry or peers on other robotics teams and things like that? How did they learn that? A big chunk of this that I don't think a lot of students lean into is how are their own school studies improving this? So for instance, I learned from, Mr. Hansen in mathematics class that I was able to use, the quadratic formula to be able to figure out X or figure out the distance from Limelight Taggle. So how are you using some of those own skills you're doing in your own learning towards making your progress towards these sections? Because it's not just about robotics industry mentors. You can also learn from mentors that are your teachers, mentors from your parents, mentors or other team members' parents, soft skills. How are you learning how to connect with people more? How are you learning to be a better teammate? Things like that. So as far as aesthetics go, I think this Connect shows that they are learning from specific people, but guidance on design, hardware, and CAD, it's not very practical. Give me a practical example of how you exactly did X, or from mentor Y you learned Z, and so on and so forth. When we get to the Reach Award, this is kind of the flip side of the Connect Award. So rather than how are you connecting with other industry professionals, it is how are you getting more people into the first program. I've talked about my gripes with this one a little bit before because it's specifically now talking about supporting the first community. They have changed this wording a little bit, so it's the first community, which is cool, but I do think that it's really more important to getting people into STEM fields rather than FIRST in general. As much as I love FIRST as an industry, I think it's doing some great things for students and learning. I think that hosting an award specifically for getting people into the program is a little bit much, in my opinion. But in any case, because it's talking about that first thing here, when you're doing a reach-based activities, you have to be talking about how are you getting more people into the program. This doesn't mean that general STEM-based events aren't important, but it does mean that you have to be showing how those general STEM-based events relate to the FIRST community in general. So if you, for instance, run an after-school program for elementary school robotics, how does that relate to funneling students into your FIRST program later on in time? As well, this is another thing that I've seen with American culture is that it's really focusing on hard numbers. How many people did you get it? How many people did you reach? How many hours of work did you put into this? And as much as I think that quality matters more than quantity, for the Reach Award specifically, it seems to me like the scoring criteria is really important based on how many hours have you sunk in, how many events have you done, what are your numbers. I like to think of this as how many person hours your team has put in. So for example, if you have 5 members that are going to run a 2-hour weekend event, that is 10 person hours that you've put in for outreach, not just 10 hours for the team, because it's not just 2 hours for the team, because 5 members are also all documenting in 2 hours of their time to be able to support that. And that really does help expand out your hours a bit. And it's still a realistic point because now it's individual team members putting this out. As long as you're being very clear that his team members have put in this many hours. I think that is a really key point here. So looking at a good example of a reach award here. Again, I think this is really wordy. It is good in that they're highlighting out specific things and putting in some photos for specific ones. However, I'd like to see more bullet points on this, and I'd like to see about how did you get more people into the first program for this one specifically. So how is this supporting the first community specifically? You really have to make sure you're relating that back as far as the Sustain Award goes. Sorry, not Sustain Award, as far as the Reach Award goes. So what kind of events are you doing to bring people into that community? Again, really talking about a lot less wording, a lot more point form. Judges don't have a lot of time to read this. And when I see a page like this, not that the things you aren't doing are valuable, but it is, wow, that's a lot of stuff to look at in a very short period of time. Now, the Sustain Award is a new one. One thing that first is rather concerned about, and it seems to me as to why the Sustain Award is a thing, is that sometimes teams pop up and then they fall away rather quickly. So they're really concerned about how are you going to get future members in so that your program continues to exist even after you've left. Team culture is a big one on this. And while it's not specifically talked, team sustainability plans or objectives, how are you making your team fun to be a part of? How are you and your team friends outside of school? Teams that, and if you can explain this in a why, teams that have fun together are more likely to stay together and bring more people into that own fold is a big one. When they talk about finances and sustainability plan, they want to see multi-year plans on how you are financially stable. You could be financially stable in 1 year, but they really want to see, do you have any sort of war chest built up from previous years? For example, in the 2027-28 season, you're going to have a whole new bunch of hardware that's coming out. How are you preparing for that expense coming up in the future? So a good example of something like Sustain here is having in your goals for you have more rookies. How are you developing those members over time? Again, aesthetics aside here from Team 1002, talking about how are you developing those range up? What are the goals? What are the steps taken? Lots of great bullet points. You could probably shorten this down. Members participated in hosting FTC and FLL events. Members helped mount simple parts. I mean, you're already kind of talking about these members. You probably don't need to say that these rookie members are doing it. Rookies help gather material and tools used in the shop environment. It's kind of saying a lot without saying a lot, so to speak. But this is really good to be showing in how are they actually building up your rookies over time. And the concept of this I really like, as well as giving me some context for what am I looking at in this photo as well. So Sustain is how are you going to stay around? Make sure you're focusing on these required things first and then move into those encouraged sections. Next, we've got the Innovate Award, and this is really focusing in on kind of one assembly. While you can talk about the whole robot, I suggest you look at one assembly or sub-assembly of that robot and how you built it up over time. How does this achieve one goal rather intelligently? So a good example of this is Teams 16091 from PowerPlay. I really like that they show their initial designs with sketches, as well as some reasonings for why it is they've done it with some calculations. This goes back to that Think Award as to why it is they're thinking that. They talk about what research they've done. They talk about why it's beneficial, and then how they've improved from V1 to V2, and how it might be an issue over time. They've also talked about their lessons learned. And it's really cool to see that as a good example of think. Now, I think that they could probably shrink down a lot of this text. Again, like I'm talking about, we finally went with our original idea. If you look at our brainstorm above, I mean, some of this, not that again, I think that is poor writing, but you only have so much time. Okay, I can already see that you've got a brainstorming up above. Why do you need to tell me that you're looking at it again? Not saying that what you've done is bad or poor practice, but you really got to think about with the amount of time that you have to put this in. Adding in additional words to make it a full sentence sometimes isn't really necessary in this respect. So for instance, in this case, after struggling through 2 qualifiers with 2 server applications, we learned how to make a geared gripper on Onshape with feature scripts. You could probably break this down into things like we chose our original idea. It was simpler to maintain, and within our team's means, 2 servos, or you could say something along the lines of, 2 servos was too complex and kept breaking. And then we went back to keep it simple, stupid. Use those as full bullet points without all the extra fluff words inside. It does show your thinking over time, shows you're expressing it, and it makes it a lot clearer to see your development of your thinking over time. Next, I'll talk about the Control Award. This one is obviously, how are you adding in programming? That's not necessarily programming for autonomous, but it can also be things related to how you're making your driver's life easier with some specific driver-based automations to make their life easier. You should push one button and it spins up the flywheel, waits until it's at a certain point, auto aligns itself, and then fires once it knows that it's at that specific distance, so your driver doesn't have to get that set up. Why does it make your driver's life easier? Why does that improve your overall cycle time? And how is that specific controlled? Are you using a PD loop? Are you using a PF controller? How are you setting those up? And then showing the judges the calculations that you're doing. I would stay away from literally putting in code, but putting in flowcharts for finite state machines, putting in flowcharts and logic charts and mathematical calculations for how you're coming up with these distances, how you're calculating the arcs for things like air sort, if it is things you're trying like that, how you're calculating lifting load, and as well as how you approach onto a target. These are all totally valid things to put inside a control. Now you have to submit a portfolio for control. So I would suggest you almost do, 2, maybe even 3 pages for that control, specifically because you need to have a portfolio inside of that control. Now, an example of a control-based machine here, what I'm talking about is putting in flowcharts for your finite state machine. And then speaking specifically, this is team Super Decode. Let's see if they've got their number. They do not have their team number. Oh, there it is. It is 18424. I think this is a good example of how you might go about running it. Some of this text starts to get a little bit small in some of it, and you might even have multiple finite state machines talking about how it is that they are beneficials in, or how they are beneficial towards your main design in that respect. And then last up here, we've got the Design Award, which is basically showing how has your robot evolved over time to have form, function, and aesthetics that still meet the need of that goal. So a great example of the Design Award is how is your robot iterating up over time. So for instance here, I think this is a really great example of something you might include with design from team 18317 Steel Eels. They've got the robot overview. They are putting annotations of what it is that I'm looking at, and then talking about the strategy. How is this useful in terms of this? This is both a great think thing and both a great design section. I do like seeing that they are designing up over time. For instance, they've got major iterations here. I really like showing this as far as design awards go, talking about V1, V2, V3, and how these things are improving. As an aesthetic point, I would personally stay away from really black texts, or not black text from large black backgrounds. It's just really hard to read in a short period of time, particularly when you get a lot of issues in there. But I think this is a great example of that bullet points that I'm talking about, how you know that it is improving, as well as things that you need to fix in terms of the future. But again, a great example of how it is that you are improving your design over time. I think this is a mostly well-designed page. Landscape's a little bit awkward as opposed to something like portrait. But overall, excellent example of something like a design-based award. Now, if you're looking for extra ways you continue to improve your portfolio, I've got a few different tools that I can give you some access to. The first tool is members in your local community. I highly suggest you swap portfolios with other teams in your area so you can see things that they're learning from, things that you're learning from, and how you might be able to sort of trade notes. It's sort of win-win for both of you to be able to do some of that analysis, as well as some of that award-based things. As far as other awards that you can get and other tools that you can move towards, I think a great tool is ftcportfoliolab.org. They've got a large repository of different based engineering portfolios. Again, these are student submitted, so your mileage may vary with a lot of them depending on where it is that they are getting, how challenging some of the regions are, and things like that. But it's a great place looking at specific portfolios. One thing I'd recommend you do before you submit things like this is make sure that you de-anonymize your personalized information or your PII, personally identifiable information. Because again, this is going up on a public website. Make sure that you do have permission from individuals to be able to put these things up. Another good tool here is portfolios.hivemindrobotics.net/FTC. They've done another great job here. It's another example of a portfolio-based system. Personally, I'd probably just go to aistudio.google.com and then throw in your own portfolio here. Say, this is what I'm looking for based off of the Decode Award. Again, make sure you depersonalize your information before you throw it into things like AI tools like this, because Gemini uses a lot of these things to be able to grow and train your own models. As well, make sure you have a mentor do this for you, because I believe at least at the time of this recording, you need to be at least 18 to be able to move into using Gemini AI. If you're looking for more resources as well as some extra tips from me, you can consider joining my community down below to get access to my vault of robotics resources. You think there's like CAD files, code snippets, other things like that. I'm curious your thoughts on your portfolio and how your team is going. As well, don't take all my advice as literal gospel here. A lot of it is, my own thinking on these things, and it is not the absolute bedrock foundation of truth. But I do think that if teams were to follow some of the advice, that you would end up with overall a far better portfolio moving into the future. And as always, best of luck out there this FTC season.